First item on the agenda is to approve the committee minutes for February 14th. Any comments on the minutes? And if none, any motions to approve the minutes? We have a
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
motion by Representative Pickert
Yes.
to approve the minutes. Do we have a second by Representative Meyer? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Minutes are approved. Next up, committee, we have discussion and possible action on House Bill 2723. So this is the bill on homelessness grants. And I think first we'll ask the Office of Revisers to give a quick summary of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, House Bill 2723 would make an appropriation of $40 million to the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services for a homeless shelter infrastructure grant program. And then subject to those appropriations, the Secretary would develop and administer a grant program to award funds to Kansas local governments for the building of or capital improvements to congregate or non-congregate shelters that provide services for homeless individuals and families and persons at risk of homelessness. And then the bill provides that the funding would be matched on a dollar for a dollar basis by the local unit of government. And then there would be language that if a local unit of government has misused funds or failed to use funds for the word purpose, enforce local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy, and provide required wraparound services, they would be required to pay back to the Secretary the amount originally awarded, or the Secretary may file a lien to be attached on the real property in the amount originally awarded under the program. And then it does create a fund in the state treasury, a homeless shelter infrastructure grant fund, and it'd be administered by the Secretary for Aging and Disability Services.
Any questions for revisers? So very good. So go ahead and open up for discussion and amendments on House Bill 2723. Committee, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If they would pass out my amendment, while they're passing that out, I'll go ahead and just read through it. It's going to be on page 1 on line 16. Sorry. The above agency shall only expend monies from such account if cities or counties are required by state or federal law or a U.S. Supreme Court ruling to provide access to adequate temporary shelter to enforce local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy. And that would go at the very end of line 16 and in front of section 2. We know that there are court cases coming up, or I should say, we believe that these cases regarding homelessness and support for shelters and camping are being reviewed at the highest court levels. And although Kansas has not been bound by a couple of the out-of-district court rulings, it's very clear that that could happen at the federal level in a very short time period after we produce this legislation. And this would give us as a safety valve to protect those that if that's what the courts are going to rule. So with that, I'd stand for questions on the amendment.
Committee, any questions on the amendment? Representative Wagner.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the amendment. I just want to clarify just one thing. So the above agency shall only expend money from such account if cities or counties are required by state or federal law or a U.S. Supreme Court ruling to provide access to adequate temporary shelter to enforce local ordinances. So this bill, I know we kind of have a thing in here about this bill itself does not require access to adequate temporary shelter, or that they have to, I mean, don't we have a thing in here about enforcing local ordinances? Is that the gist of it? I mean, would this bill qualify so that they would be required? Are we reaching that threshold, I guess?
Thank you for the question. I think I would direct that to the revisor's office, if you could maybe field that particular question.
Thank you. Yeah, what the amendment would do is say that, yeah, if they're required by state or federal law to provide access to the adequate temporary shelter to enforce the local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy. And in this section 2 of the bill, on page 2, there is that requirement of the enforcement of local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy as part of the program requirements.
Could you find out what line is that on the, it's like on page 1. Line. Okay, number 6. All right, I see it now. Okay, no, thank you. That's very helpful.
If I'm understanding it correctly, the agency would be able to offer the grants if state, federal, or U.S. Supreme Court ruling essentially upholds, if the state or federal takes the position of kind of what the Ninth Circuit ruling is, or if the U.S. Supreme Court upholds the Ninth Circuit. I mean, it's broader than that. They could enact laws, but that's the general concept.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yeah, it would be really if there is that either the adoption of a law or the Supreme Court upholds that Ninth Circuit ruling.
Representative Meyer.
Just a clarifying question. So what would happen maybe if the Supreme Court does not uphold that ruling of the Ninth District? How would this be affected? How would that, like this amendment affect it?
Mr. Chairman, the amendment would if the Supreme Court does not have a ruling to that effect, does not uphold the Ninth Circuit, then the expenditures from this account would not be allowed by the Secretary.
Okay, so just to clarify, so you're saying if the Supreme Court did not uphold that, then this amendment would mean that the monies would not be able to be provided if the camping ban went into effect. Is that? I feel like I'm really confused. I'm sorry.
Yes, I mean the expenditures would only be allowed from this account, the $40 million, if they're required to by the Supreme Court ruling to provide access. So if the Supreme Court did not have a ruling to that effect, then the money would not be spent from the account.
Representative Roth.
Just a question. Are there currently any state or federal laws requiring cities or counties to provide temporary shelter?
Is that a question for the revisers, probably?
Either the reviser or the carrier of the amendment.
Okay, if you're asking about state, I'm not aware of any state law regarding camping other under the natural parks and wildlife. Everything that I'm aware of is through city ordinances or county ordinances. I'm not familiar with any county ordinances that are against certain functions, but I would guess that there are some in Kansas. I am not familiar with federal law on that issue.
Well, yeah, may I? Well, my question is, it says if cities or counties are required by state or federal law, and we do know there's a Supreme Court ruling coming down that could just, it could go either way. So if we did do something here today, it could end up being moot, I mean, you know, or it could be valuable. But but I'm just saying, you put in here required by state or federal law, and I do know that some cities have camping ordinances on public property, like in parks and stuff like that, that are against the law, and they're given an opportunity to move on. And, I mean, they're not took to jail or anything like that, but they're, like in my communities, they get moved on. And so, but I just wanted to know if there was any current state or federal laws requiring cities or counties, which is the way I read that, which I may be confused, to provide adequate temporary shelter.
I'm not aware of any state laws that would require that. I am familiar with a lot of ordinances in my counties about parks and recreation and restrictions, but those are done at the local level. I am not aware of any state laws that would require those things at this time. That's just my general information.
So if the state would mandate cities and counties, let's say somehow the state mandates cities and counties to provide temporary shelter, then this would come into effect. Your 40 million would be spent. If the state of Kansas said it's required by state law to.
I believe so. That's my general understanding, because now the process is set into place.
Yeah.
And so therefore, then the money can be
So this
expended.
is a safeguard.
That's correct.
And, okay. I might understand.
No, I think, and I'll come back to this after Representative Howell's got next, but it seems like it's more of we've heard the term unfunded mandates. And so if the state were to put a mandate, or the federal government would put a mandate, or let's say the Supreme Court upheld the Ninth Circuit ruling and put a mandate on cities that if they want to enforce camping bans, they have to supply shelters. It appears that this is kind of recognizing that it's an additional burden put on those cities from the Supreme Court, essentially. And this would provide kind of funding for that mandate that's outside of their control. But I'll happy to come back on that. Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. David, could you, so for example, when it says state, federal law, or Supreme Court ruling, so that would be state court, federal court, or U.S. Supreme Court, correct?
Mr. Chair, it would be either the passage of a state law by the legislature or federal law by Congress, or a Supreme Court ruling to that effect. I mean, I suppose if potentially if the state Supreme Court found that existing state law required this somehow by interpretation, it may come into effect. But right now, it would just be really the passage of a state law or federal law by the legislature or Congress.
Thank you for clarifying. And then if I could, I just will point out that with the bill in its original language, if this was added, if the Supreme Court did not come back with this type of ruling, then the whole thing would be null and void. The whole bill would be null and void.
Is that a question for, I'm happy to answer.
I mean, that's my understanding, is that, I mean, I guess maybe I should start with the revisor, but if you want to comment, you're certainly welcome.
Okay, so yeah, I believe so. I think the amendment, so I personally have concerns with the money. So it seems like there's a money question, there's a policy question. And so on the money side, should the state be funding it? And so I think the amendment kind of puts a trigger in there to protect the cities if there's an unfunded mandate that now they have to follow in order to enforce their laws, then the state would help them with that unfunded mandate. But if there is no mandate, no requirement for those cities to provide shelter beds, then the state would not get involved in funding at a local level. Representative Roth.
Thank you, Chairman. So I guess if it is, let's just say it's mandated by the Supreme Court that we've got to provide shelter. But my small communities and the small communities I'm aware of that, and as we heard testimony in smaller communities, sometimes it's a hidden issue. The homeless are hidden and stuff, you know, and then they don't have the resources for the wraparound services that they need and stuff. I mean, I still think my communities and the communities I'm aware of in everywhere else in the state is going to end up with short end of the stick, no matter how this gets divided, you know. And I'm going to stand up for those small communities. I just don't. I guess I think I would support this, you know, but then my small communities might get hung on the hook if they're mandated to provide homeless shelters. And so I don't want that to happen.
So I think, just to clarify, the mandate, and this is kind of what we're seeing in the Ninth Circuit. As I understand the Ninth Circuit decision, it requires cities, if they want to enforce their camping bans, then they have to offer some sort of shelter bed. So for the smaller cities, typically they don't have a lot of enforcement on camping bans. So the Ninth Circuit ruling, if it got applied to Kansas, from my perspective, would not affect small cities because they rarely have a lot of trouble with camping bans. But if the Ninth Circuit ruling did end up applying to Kansas, then this would be available to help those small cities.
That sounds good, but I'm still hesitant because of some of the questions that I ask, like with asking Wichita, how much are you going to take? Well, up to 20 million. And so that's half of that. I heard yesterday it was 25 million. And so that's even more, and that even leaves even less. And I mean, that even leaves less for any of the other larger communities. You take like Garden City, Dodge City, Lawrence, Topeka, Kansas City, Olathe. I mean, so anyway, well, I'm sorry, but I think I would support this, but then the people that I represent, the small communities that I know of and are in my district, could get hung on the hook if there wasn't the if clause, if you want to do this. And I want to apologize for not reading. I should have read that Ninth Circuit decision before I came in here, so I apologize for not doing that. Thank you.
I think there might be a little bit of confusion on the percentages and everything else and what this amendment does, but there might be an amendment coming later to address the percentages of smaller communities if this grant were to be used. Representative Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've also heard 20 million, 25 million bandied about. I've always assumed, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, that this bill, the cities and counties and municipalities apply for the money, right? And then it'll be divvied out. But just because Wichita wants 20 million doesn't mean it's going to get 20 million, right? So I'm assuming whoever is in charge of divvying this money out is going to be fair about that and recognize that all of us need it if required by the Supreme Court.
Representative Roth.
I'm sorry I'm talking so much today, but I'm kind of passionate about this. It's a one-to-one grant, and Wichita's got the 20 million and can step right up. They already said they're going to put 20 millions toward it, and so they could step right up and get another 20 million if this was in thing. And even if they apply and they've got the one-to-one grant, then you could, and they said no, well then you got to have a good reason to say no, because then it could be discriminatory because they're asking for too much. But anyway,
I think the conversation is not about the amendment. So the concern about cities getting more or less money is a completely separate thing from the amendment. Sure.
my final comment. I think I would support this, but I'm still concerned that the smaller communities is either going to get less, not get enough, or depending on how it's worded, because if you put if in there, it's okay. I mean, if they do this, well, if they don't want to do this, then that's fine too. But if they do this, then they've got to, if they're going to enforce that, but they're going to do that, then they can't. So I'm cautious, but I think I would support this.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you.
I think I'm starting to understand this a little better, but my question would be for either the reviser or the bringer of the amendment. So for cities and counties that do not have camping bans or anything like that on the books already, would they still be eligible for this funding under this amendment? So I think that kind of tracks a little bit with what your concerns are, if I'm understanding. So some areas don't have bans or enforceable measures or anything like that because they don't necessarily need them. It's not right for their area or some other reason. And so my question, I guess, would be, if that's not already in place in their area, would they still be able to access these funds?
You know, and I keep reading the words, and just like he mentions the word if, access to adequate temporary shelter to enforce local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy. And if you do not have any, in my opinion, they're not impacted. So that's my opinion on that. The reviser, if he has any opinion. Okay, lines 1 through 6 provide long-term wraparound services prioritized for Kansas residents, enforce local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy. And then it talks about funding to a local government shall be matched at a local government receiving the funding on the basis of $1 provided by the local government for each $1 provided. Am I?
So if I'm understanding the revisers, well, it's more Representative Johnson, your statement is, so if they do have local ordinances, then they have to enforce them. But there's nothing in the bill as written or the amendment to require them to
I
have.
have not read anything in our bill that requires us to do that.
Okay. So Representative Meyer, are you finished? I'm sorry. All right. Representative Howell.
So since we're, just a reminder, in the base language of this bill, which I don't believe this amendment would change, the qualifications and things that are in lines 1 through 6 are only for people actually applying for the grant that we just read. So when we add the current amendment that we're discussing in, then it would be saying that grant money only becomes available if the Supreme Court rules in this way. If the Supreme Court rules the opposite direction, then the whole bill goes away, basically. It's effectively null and void. It goes, if they rule the opposite direction. So if they said, for example, let me spell that out. So if the U.S. Supreme Court rules and says cities and counties can enforce local ordinances regarding camping and vagrancy, even if they don't have adequate shelter, okay, then the monies would not become available. Did I say that? Does that make sense, David? Am I correct? Okay, thank you.
Representative Roth.
So should that happen, and I'm getting confused here on what happens. Should the Supreme Court rule one way where that makes this law null and void, could this law be, or could this bill be brought back next year? I don't know who to ask that.
Yes, the bill could be brought back next year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Lewis.
I'll try to make it as simple as I think it can be. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which governs California and Hawaii and the West Coast and Idaho and Arizona, has ruled that there's a constitutional amendment such that if a city wants to enforce an ordinance concerning camping or vagrancy, they have to provide temporary shelter. That's the only circuit in the country that has done so. That has been appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case, and it's expected that they will be ruling probably in July, or July 4th is usually the date by which all the decisions are issued. So by July, we should know what the Supreme Court is going to rule. And as I understand this amendment, if the court affirms the Ninth Circuit, says, yes, there's this constitutional right, then this law would kick in, and we would be providing monies for localities pursuant to this law. If, however, the Supreme Court were to reject the Ninth Circuit's decision, and then there would be no funding under this law.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree with that assessment. Thank you.
I apologize. Committee, Representative Johnson offered his amendment. Is there a second on the amendment? Second from Representative Humphreys. Committee, any further discussion? Representative Howell.
So, colleagues, I guess one of the things we need to ask ourselves as we make this decision is, do we think that we have any moral and ethical reasons to provide help and real, substance abuse treatment, et cetera, to people that are currently in a very bad trap? And do we personally, as Kansans, want to get rid of encampments? I want to get rid of encampments. I want homeless people to get real help. I understand that I don't think we have a legal requirement to do so, but I do believe that there's it's not morally and ethically okay to allow people to continue to live in encampments and to not receive help. And they need motivation to get help. And I think by doing a combination of both, which I know there's on both sides of the aisle, there's lots of people who have things that make them uncomfortable with this bill. But the reason I brought this forward is because I believe the things that are in combination in this bill are the things that can make it effective to make Kansas a better place to truly get help for the homeless. And I think it will actually save us money in the long run compared to what we're spending right now with our jails, our EMS, our fire, our government-run mental health services. You know, all those things, we're spending millions. Granted, most of it's coming from the local level. It's coming from our property tax dollars and not the state. So I guess we each need to just decide if we're willing to do nothing and continue in the status quo where we're at, which is what the risk that could happen if we accept this amendment. And I make all my arguments with all due respect for my colleague, Chairman, by the way.
Representative Droege, I think you had your hand up earlier. I think I passed over. Do you have any comments? Or
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if we need to continue with this amendment before I bring up any other comments, but this is pretty contentious. I've talked to my constituents. They don't feel that this is the right thing. I've talked to other legislators. They don't think that we're doing the right thing with this bill. I think we need more time to evaluate the response of people in the cities and the communities that we're going to deal with, and it's just not a time to just because we need to do something, we need to spend the money. I think that we don't need to immediately respond, and just putting money on it is not the thing to make it go away. Homelessness is not just going to be an easy fix. It's going to take a lot of work. So I don't feel that we should jump on this right now to pass a bill out of this committee. I think I would like to table this until next session.
just one moment, committee. So Representative Droege, was that a comment or was that a motion?
That is a motion if I can do that at this time. I didn't know if we needed to finish the amendment that was on the table first.
So committee, there's a motion to table. It's a non-debatable motion, but it does require a second. So is there a second to the motion? Representative Lewis.
Is that motion appropriate even though we have an amendment, motion to amend already on the table?
So I believe it is allowed if it's offered as a substitute motion. So just as a straight motion. So
Right.
Good point. So Representative Droege.
I will then offer it as a substitute motion.
So there's been a substitute motion to table the bill. I mean, this is non-debatable, but it does require a second. Is there a second? Point of order, Representative Roth. I asked the reviser, and I'll double check.
I'll second it, and then it doesn't matter.
So we have a motion to table, and we have a second by Representative Lewis. So all motions in committee require a second. Thank you for clarifying. So committee, all those in favor of the motion to table, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. It appears the noes have it. Noes do have it. Noes have it. We're back on the discussion and I think back on the amendment. So Representative Johnson, I just real quick on with regards to the amendment. I think it's good because it takes care of some of the concern about spending state dollars for what is often looked at as a local issue. At least that's my perspective. I've also been encouraged over the last few months with some of the work the cities are doing. They were hesitant, from what I understand, for many months or even years to be proactive because of concerns of the Ninth Circuit ruling, which doesn't apply to Kansas, but they were hesitant. But recently, they've kind of gotten rid of that hesitation. They've started to clean up some of the camps, starting to enforce their ordinances, engage with the business community, and I think they've shown that the local communities can really address this. And so I believe it would be a little bit early and too quick for the state to step in. However, what the amendment does is it offers a safety net for the local communities if they have an unfunded mandate. So it does take care of those local communities if somebody outside of their control puts restrictions on them. So I appreciate the amendment. Any further comments, committee? Seeing none, Representative Johnson, you can close.
Thank you. I close.
So committee, there's a motion second on the Johnson amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. Division's been called. All those in favor of the Johnson amendment, please raise your hand. Chair votes aye. 7 in favor. All those opposed? Six opposed. So with 7 for the amendment, 6 opposed, the amendment passes. Back on discussion and amendments. Committee, any discussion or amendments? Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have an amendment. I don't know how to describe which one it is. It's 3 pages. It has a balloon on the 3rd page. Jesse isn't with us. Do you want me to start explaining it or wait? I've got it, thanks.
Representative Humphreys, would you like to explain your amendment?
Yep. There's actually several pieces of this amendment. On the first page, it defines shelter and it defines wraparound services. There was a little bit of confusion about that when we had the hearing. And then there was also some language that just needed to be cleaned up. You see at the bottom of page 1, wraparound housing services, long-term wraparound services. So just making it consistent, just saying wraparound services. And then at the top of page 2, that number 5 was redundant, so just taking that out. And then adding in that the municipalities must comply with section 3, and the 3 is the balloon, which I'll get to in just a second, section 3. But it's saying that the Kansas local government shall comply with section 3. And then that next little piece in the middle of the second page is a reporting requirement. just saying that in the honor before the 2025 session of the legislature, local governments that have been awarded funds shall submit a report to the department, to KDADS. It's just kind of a reporting requirement. And then at the bottom, section 3, it becomes the balloon, which is on the 3rd page of the amendment. And section 3 basically says that cities and counties must adopt ordinances, and that they must, they can't refuse to have ordinances that prohibit unauthorized public camping, sleeping, or obstructions on sidewalks. And then there's a couple of exceptions in there, like if there's a festival or something, and then they could camp on public property. And so basically, so that first section 3 is a enforcement section, that they must enforce their ban on public camping. Then section 4 is that section about dropping off individuals into a different municipality or different jurisdiction where they don't, where they haven't had a home or that they haven't been there before. We talked about that also. And then, sorry, I think there's one other piece that I forgot to tell you about. It is, oh, maybe, yep, I think that was it. Okay, so that's the amendment. Several pieces, several different things.
Committee, any questions to the, or we have a motion on the amendment?
I move my amendment.
We have a motion on the amendment. Do we have a second? We have a second by Representative Droege. Committee, any questions on the amendment? Representative Roth, then Wagner, then Holen, then Howell. Representative Roth.
All right. On section 4 on drop-off, it talks about directly providing or funding the transportation. Who's funding and paying for the transportation?
Is that under number 1?
4.
Okay, sorry.
Section 4.
Yes,
and
4.
Under the 1 in parentheses.
Yeah.
And then it says, but not limited to directly providing or funding the transportation. Who's funding the transportation?
Okay, so that section 1 is that,
Representative Humphries, do you have your microphone on?
do I have this on?
Yeah, sorry.
I'll get a little closer. That section 1 is the definition of drop-off. And so that's A1. And then B is no city or county shall drop off a homeless individual. So we put a definition of drop off up there in section 1. So they're saying the definition of drop off is to it's the act of transporting a homeless individual to a different place. And that includes it's about the transportation. So
Who's paying for that?
well, I think from what I understand in certain situations is in Kansas, there's been small towns or municipalities, and they have taken a homeless individual and dropped them off in Wichita or somewhere else. And so I don't know if they got an Uber for the person or if they actually, but the amendment is about that you cannot drop someone off.
Okay, my
The amendment is that dropping off is prohibited by this amendment. Unless the person, is a prior resident of that community or has some connection to the community, and then that's fine.
Okay, my question is, this talks about transporting an individual and who pays for the transportation of that individual?
If I may step in.
Please.
So this is a definition. It's not a requirement. So it's just a definition of what it means to drop off. And it's including in the definition of the meaning of drop-off, somebody who would pay for the transportation of, let's say, a homeless person. Here's a quick example. So maybe, if I'm understanding this correctly, a county out in western Kansas has an individual, and they decide that individual is, let's say he's homeless, and this is happening, so this is where this addresses a question that came up in our interim committee. But you have counties out in other parts of Kansas that don't have a large city in them, and if they have a homeless individual, let's say from Colorado or from wherever, they will transport that individual to another city in Kansas. Specifically, Lawrence brought this up. And that county may or may not be paying for that transportation. So even if they put the gentleman on a bus and they pay for his bus ticket, that's included in the definition of drop-off. It's just a definition, but it's not really getting into who's paying.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Representative Humphries.
So I will say, if look, section little b there is really the crux of this section 4. No city or county shall drop off a homeless individual outside such city or county's jurisdiction. And so it would be the city or county that is taking a homeless individual and dropping them off somewhere else.
Representative Roth.
So a city or county that has no services available couldn't take the individual to a county or city that has services?
Sorry, just hold on. We'll get to it. Representative Humphries, would you like to answer?
Yes. I mean, I mean, if Representative Howell has a really good answer, I'd love to defer.
Representative Howell.
Okay, full confession, I've seen this before, so I have an advantage over you all. This is not my first time to read it. So under B in section 4, you see number 1, then you look down to number 2. See number 2 there in the parentheses? It says such drop-off is at a facility or with a person, business, or organization that has agreed to accept such individual. So what this is meaning is that if, for example, I'm just to say it this way. If a rural county has a homeless person or someone who becomes homeless and they don't feel like they have adequate resources to help this person, someone from this city or county can drive them to another county that does have resources, as long as they hand them over directly to, take them to the homeless shelter or organization that will, and they agree to take this individual. They can't just drop them over the county line and walk away, okay? So, which I've had, and as we've discussed before in this committee, I've personally had sheriffs and police chiefs tell me that they personally have done this themselves. So this is just saying, you can't just drop them off at the county line. You actually have to take them over to an appropriate place to get real services if your county doesn't have it. It's not forcing anybody from that county to do so.
Representative Wagner. Representative Hoagland.
So this said homeless person from rural Kansas has a medical emergency, not a hospital in this town. If you take them to a hospital to be cared for, will that be considered dropping them off in another jurisdiction?
Just a second. It says in number 1, such drop-off location is in the city where such individual was a prior resident. Was a resident prior to receiving healthcare services. Okay, so that's just saying that That you can take them to somewhere that they have been a prior resident, and you can take them somewhere that a facility has agreed to accept them. So if you're taking them to an emergency room and they're accepting them, I think that would be covered under this, because that service, you know, the hospital or emergency room is agreeing to see them. And they have to see them. So that's an agreement. I think that example would fall under number B2.
So you think the hospital has to take them whether they've been a resident there or not, just because they're a hospital? So if somebody was in an emergency, a medical emergency crisis, you could just take them to the closest emergency room? And they would be required to take them?
I think I think hospitals are required to take people in emergency rooms. Yeah.
I have more issues. In attachment A, it says all cities and counties shall adopt an ordinance or resolution. So this is a mandate that all cities and counties have to adopt an ordinance or resolution that they didn't ask for?
That would be, I went over this with a fine tooth comb, but thank you. I appreciate you asking that question. My understanding, just a second. My understanding was, sorry. I was thinking it was those that receive the funds, but I think it's every, please, and if anyone. Yep, so it's, yeah, all cities and counties shall adopt an ordinance or resolution. Yes.
So this is once again a state that's all about local control until they wanted to control the whole state?
Whatever you want to call it. Which we.
Something in here, and this may be a silly question. In the definition of a shelter, you say a shelter means any facility which primary purpose is to provide temporary or transitional shelter for the general population or a specific population of homeless individuals or families. Does it have to be their primary purpose? I mean, there are buildings that take in homeless people that is not their primary purpose. My homeless shelter that I have volunteer in is in a church.
Yeah, so this is about the funding of the funding is to make expenditures to shelters. And we're defining shelter by this. So it's the infrastructure of the fund, you know, it's funding infrastructure for shelters, and shelters is defined that way in this definition.
And this definition only pertains to House Bill 2723.
Yes. You can see it says as used in this section.
Representative Howell? Or Representative Hoagland, you can continue. I apologize. All right. That's great. Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 questions, both of them for David. One is under section 2 with the amendment, line 1, it's with the definition of shelter that we were just talking about. I wanted to understand, so is there a legal definition for facility? And kind of part of that is this is what I'm wondering. So it says shelter means any facility which primary purpose is to provide temporary or transitional shelter for the general population or a specific population of homeless individuals or families. So what I'm wondering is, does facility mean like an actual physical structure that's like a long-term permanent structure? Or especially with the word temporary transitional, I'm just wondering, would that mean that we could take the grant money and use it to like have a tent city?
Representative Humphrey, just a reminder, you're not in judiciary, even though it feels like it.
It sure does.
Defining words. Would you like to reply?
Yeah. I think we know, I think the definition here is to help us understand that it's a shelter and that it's not housing. I think that's what the difference is.
So-
It's temporary, as it says, and transitional shelter. And it's about infrastructure. And so the grant money is available for cities and counties or municipalities that are putting infrastructure money into shelters.
Okay, so I just want to double check that we think the language reflects what you're saying, and it's can't be interpreted a different way for the grant money to go to like paying for tents or something of equal. There's more than one way you could apply temporary. You understand my question? So if either any of the attorneys or the advisor would like to weigh in, I just want some assurance. I'm open. I just want to make sure that it is, I'm fine with the definition of saying that the shelter itself is going to serve as transitional or temporary shelter. But I want to make sure that that whatever we're calling the shelter in the first place is actually a physical, solid structure that's like a permanent thing in the community. It's not just a temporary thing. And we spend our grant dollars towards that.
And so you think, I'm just honestly asking this question, you think it would be better not to have the definition in this bill?
I'm not necessarily saying that, actually. I just want to make sure that there's only one interpretation for it.
Uh-huh.
That's my intention to my question. Is that clear as mud?
I understand your question is more just the definition of facility. Can a facility just mean a physical structure, or can it just mean a larger tent? So I would hope that a facility would mean a structure, but.
I mean, that was the way that the definition was intended, of course, that it's a permanent structure.
I assume so, but I just want to make sure. Maybe I'm overthinking this,
Yeah, we can.
Had a lot of caffeine to prepare for this meeting.
Did the revisor have an idea?
If there does need to be clarification, a suggestion would be adding a word
Permanent?
by facility that would help clarify what type of facility.
Okay, I mean, such as the word permanent, would that ease your concern? Okay, with the permission of the second and the chair, I'm fine putting the word permanent in front of the word facility if you would agree to that, Mr. Chair.
Would the second, Representative Droege, would you be okay with the addition of the word? Okay, which word just to clarify? What would you like, just permanent facility?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any further questions to the carry of the amendment? Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. I believe that Representative Hoagland already asked this question, but I just wanted to further clarify. So in new section 3, I believe it would be A, all cities and counties shall adopt an ordinance or resolution respectively prohibiting unauthorized public camping, sleeping, et cetera, without exceptions or conditions other than authorization by a temporary permit issued by such city or county. So for this one, as I think you already mentioned, this means that all cities and all counties throughout the state would now be required to come up with an ordinance to enforce public camping.
Yes.
Okay. And then on B, no city or county shall refuse to enforce such ordinance or resolutions. That's for all cities and counties across the state.
It's basically saying you have an ordinance and you need to enforce them.
So they don't all currently have ordinances, though. So is there language prepared for a camping, an unauthorized public camping, sleeping, or obstruction of public sidewalk resolution? Or, I mean, has the state, have we come up with one that would be universal across everywhere? Or can they come up with their own?
It just says an ordinance, so they can come up with their own that does these, that does these things.
So it would have to completely prohibit any of this.
Unauthorized public camping, sleeping, or obstructions of sidewalks.
And this has nothing to do with the funding.
That's right.
Can you tell me about the writ of mandamus? I'm not an attorney, so I'm not real familiar with that. That's a new term for me. I heard some rumors floating around about what it might be due to the Senate's interpretation and amendments on their bill, version of this bill. So I'd like some more clarification on that.
I mean, I'll let the revisor start, but then I can.
Okay.
Or, I mean, go ahead. I mean, I think it's appropriate for you to start, but I'm happy to finish up. Or I can go first if you prefer.
Yeah, the writ of mandamus would really just be, that's, you could go to court and then request a court order if there's a, to try to enforce the, this section. So it would just be going to court and saying, there's a violation of this, we need an order to require enforcement.
Okay.
So it's like I mean, if you think of it as the court is a little bit higher authority, it's giving the authority to someone, either a lower court or maybe a person or an organization or agency or something to have recourse at the court.
Which level of court would this be at?
I would guess any person may bring a writ of mandamus for a violation of the section of, and I would think it would be to the city or county or to whoever who is refusing to either adopt or enforce the ordinance.
So this could either be interpreted as a municipal court case, a county court case, or a state court case. Any of the three? There's no real definitive anything here that I'm seeing.
I mean, I think you would have to go to the court where you feel like you've been harmed or that you feel like the court is not enforcing, they're not doing what they need to do. It needs to be appropriate to the action that you're asking them to do would need to be the court that is in charge of that particular action. I think Representative Lewis may have something to say about that too.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can think, well, a writ of mandamus is a writ that's issued to a public official that's not doing their job. You can think, in the private arena, you would think of an injunction against a private individual, but a writ of mandamus I think of as an injunction or an order to a public official. In this case, it would be the city council, I assume, who's not doing what they're ordered to do in this amendment. So that's the writ. You would bring it in whichever court has jurisdiction, and I'm sure that would be defined in other parts of our statutes.
So I hope you, okay, thank you. Do we have any idea approximately how much those types of hearings or whatnot cost cities and counties? And how many because it sounds here to me, it says any person. So that could be anybody out of all the citizens in the state of Kansas. Let's say every single one of us brought one. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but how much could this potentially cost our cities and our counties if they're trying to find a way to interpret this very broad language, and very, I mean, specific call for them to create ordinance and resolutions that are not defined, or, I mean, as was stated previously, this is a state mandate now. So how much could this potentially cost them? I mean, we're looking at, what was the date on this previously? 2025, right? So what do we think? I mean, do you have any familiarity, anyone, with how much these cases normally cost to process, to go through? How much it would cost the cities or the counties? No? Okay. So I have many concerns with this, very obviously. I think you all know me well enough to know that. This is a non-starter. And I really had hoped that we could come to the table with some amendments that we could find compromises on. We have, I feel like, spent much time discussing this issue, and all of us are passionate and care about it deeply. We all have different policy positions on it, of course. But I think y'all are aware with many of the issues that have been raised to us about amendments such as those in specific new Section 3, A through D, would not work for the majority of our counties and municipalities, including small cities and towns like Representative Roth was discussing, all the way up to suburban areas or places like Wyandotte County that don't even have a shelter in place at this time, nor do they have the plans to, you know, expand them. So I would suggest, if we would like to continue this conversation in good faith, that we strike new Section 3, A through D, so that we can continue to get through our conversation and really do something about this issue for our entire state and for all of the many organizations and individuals who have come to us begging for us to do something about this on both sides. This should not be partisan. This here feels very partisan, very politicized, and I am very familiar with the organization wherein this came from and their intent with this. And I do not believe that this is made in good faith. I would like to continue this conversation. So I would like it if we could entertain, would it be a motion?
I guess, real quick, just please try not to insinuate whether something's made in good faith or not. You may have a different opinion on the amendment, that's fine, but I think
I understand
just
that.
the intention of the carry of the amendment, and I'm happy to go into a little bit more about that portion of the amendment,
I
but
understand that. I'll take that in
Thank you.
definitely, sorry.
In good faith.
I definitely, in good faith, I definitely did not mean to disparage you. This is something I think that we've all had a very good conversation about in the past, and I think you all know where many of us stand on this. I would just like to entertain, you know, for the committee to entertain removing this specific section so that we can continue our discussion on other amendments that may be presented. So I think that's the substitute motion. Is that right? Okay, thanks. Yes, right.
So committee, we have a substitute motion, as I understand it, to offer this amendment, but to strike section C. So keep the amendment, but strike section C. Section 3, I'm sorry, not C, C3. So section 3. So that would be attachment A, right at the top of the attachment, letters A, B, C, or A, B, what's called B, and then C and D. So those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little portions. Is there a second on the substitute motion? We have a motion, and it's been seconded by Representative Carr. Committee discussion on the substitute. Representative Humphries.
Thank you. and I understand your concern. We had a hearing about this last year, as you remember. And I think this is the crux of our homeless problem, is to, the beginning step is that cities and counties should have ordinances prohibiting public camping and those things, and they should need to enforce those. And to me, I understand it's different than the funding. This Section 3 is adding on something a little bit different, but I think it's important that we understand that is the crux of the homeless issue, that if we do not allow encampments on public property and the camping and the sleeping on the sidewalks in front of businesses and, the safety concerns that come with those encampments, to me, this is the crux. So I would oppose the amendment. I do understand that it's a little bit different than the funding that we're talking about, and we are adding something different on here, so I certainly acknowledge that. But it is in good faith, because I think this is the best way to really help with the homeless situation, is to have the ordinances and to enforce them. So that's why it's in here.
Sure. Quick response from Representative Meyer, then we'll continue with questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate you saying that. So I think my biggest concern with this section happens to be that it is a mandate, and then also we don't have anywhere for these people to go if the camping bans are enforced. So I can continue that conversation later, but I just want to let you know where that was coming from.
Representative Droege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Representative Humphreys, and I want to put in that no one I know thinks we should give state money to a city that doesn't have to do the things the rest of the state thinks needs to be done. It's just that's the thing I hear time and time again. Well, so they just get to do whatever they want, and then we have to give them money to help them. I think that it's one of the imperative things to go with this, that we need to have some attitude changes in this world. Thank you.
Representative Roth.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, I just would like you just to consider this. Letting each county and each city develop their own ordinance is a train wreck. They can utilize terms like if and may enforce, if we enforce. And if you've got 105 counties and I knew the number of cities, but I forgot right off the top of my head. All these different cities that are being mandated, being required, which I don't think that's, I mean, we do that stuff here. We pass bills all the time that affect counties and municipalities and cities, and they're good bills. This particular bill and what we're talking about today, I don't think is good. And so by letting them just create whatever they want with no standard, then you go from one town in the same county to the next town and you've got a different ordinance, a different style ordinance. And so when we get done with this, I'd like to have something else to say. But I thank you for letting me say that.
Representative Hoagland.
That sounded like an invite to happy hour. Okay, so we talked about what's it going to cost the cities and the counties for somebody calling and putting up, filing a complaint, filing a lawsuit with the mayor, okay? Or the county commissioner, or the city commissioner, or whoever. And then what, do they get to file against the city and the county? And then what's it going to cost for all of these counties and cities to write their ordinances? And yeah, they're not going to match. But this looks like a whole lot of money being mandated by the state on the cities, and cities that want to have an ordinance for camping probably have one. So, but mandating the other cities that don't want one or don't have one and forcing them to put one in place does not sound like a good use of our time. This is just, once again, criminalizing homelessness. And we decided last year that wasn't a good idea.
Representative Howell?
Thank you, Chair. So once again, I'll just reiterate, I understand that there's a lot of things in this discussion today that are hard for both sides of the aisle. And I just want to point out a couple of things. One is that in Section A, there are some significant differences than what we discussed last session. One significant difference is there's no fines on the homeless. In fact, there's actually no penalty whatsoever on the homeless whatsoever. The only action that's going to be taken is the writ of mandamus, okay, thank you, that would happen upon the elected official, not the homeless. To me, that's a significant difference. Another point I'd like to make is cities and counties make ordinances weekly, if not almost daily, okay? And it basically costs almost nothing. It's about the, like having an amendment to a bill made, okay? And then vote on it, okay? It's the same principle, okay? Even though having a mandate is unpleasant, and I would prefer not to do that in a lot of ways, I think that there is, first of all, there is some guidelines here in, A through D that, or really A through C in this case, that kind of have some guidelines that would be consistent from county to county and city to city. And they can make their own ordinances, but they have to fall in within those guidelines, okay? And then if they don't ever have a homeless person, for example, then there's no reason they have to enforce the ordinance. But it's kind of a preventative. It's being prepared for something that could happen in the future, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And then I'll address D with the writ of mandamus. This actually is already currently happening in our state. In fact, it's happening in Lawrence right now. This is actually already allowed under the law. So we're actually not changing anything from the rights of the citizens. We're just repeating it again in this law. So with all those factors considered, and then you add in the fact that I think this is going to be required to get this passed across in both houses, I think it's reasonable. Thank you.
Representative Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are really tons and tons to unpack here, but let me start here. We heard testimony from those leaders in the city that I represent, Wichita, last year with respect to the number of homeless that we've got. If I look here at these items under Attachment A, Section 3, and I'll look specifically at subsection B, D, and C, the city of Wichita has spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last few years. The assistant city manager spoke to the HOT team. The HOT team works daily with the homeless. If I look at what we have in this particular subsection, this is undermining everything that they've done. This states that that they will have to abide without question, or there could be a penalty that would be bestowed upon said officer for not applying what we are considering these ordinances that we know are already in place. But the hot team has the latitude right now to converse with those individuals, find a secondary alternative to what they might do. According to this, if I find you sleeping on a sidewalk, then I have to enforce that and therefore arrest you and put you in jail. Whatever, can someone quote the ordinance? Anyone? So if you can't quote the ordinance, then please don't interrupt with a because obviously you don't know. So I'll continue. Potentially, they'll go to jail. At the end of everything, anytime you're arrested by the police, right, the end result is a potential jail stay, right? If you're fined and you're homeless, you could pull out a checkbook and pay the fine. Probably don't have one of those to pull out. And if you can't pull it out and pay the fine, then it goes to the next level, the next level, and the next level. Eventually, it ends up in jail time. That's why we have a police department. That's what they do. According to this, if they don't enforce those, then they themselves would be in trouble. What we're doing here is we're undermining the city council, and that police department that has worked diligently and very hard for years and years and years to attempt to combat this problem. Now, some of the smaller communities may not or may be able to accommodate, but we just heard last week that there will be upwards of 250 individuals that will be released, in all actuality, into my district at the end of this month. First, I would say, we don't have the capacity. I don't know what we're going to do as a city, but we certainly don't have the capacity to place them anywhere in any sort of alternative or temporary housing or shelter. So, on an instance like this, what this would do is tell the police officers that you don't have a choice, right? What you've got to do is you've got to go corral them up, much like I said last week, just pull up with the bus. I really don't want.
Representative Carr, if you can, I know there's a lot of good points in the story, but if you can go to your point a little quicker, that would be
Okay,
appreciated.
we're short on time. So again, I vote that all of those items, A, B, and C, as well as the D, that we just remove them from this particular amendment. I don't see how they're going to work in a city the size of Wichita, and then we're going to force either a change in the city's policy with respect to that. They'll have to change the ordinances that say, and instead of penalizing someone for it, that the punishment is simply a conversation, because that's what we're going to have to do, right? And with that, I rest.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 quick points. Representative Howe is correct. The writ of mandamus is available regardless of whether we said it was available. That's how you enforce public officials to do what they're supposed to do. And as far as the costs, I would just say that, anybody bringing a writ has to pay the attorneys to bring it. So I don't think there's going to be excessive litigation in this area.
Representative Droege.
I'd like to bring, this homeless thing is not going to go away quick. It's been here a while, a long time. It's not going to go away quick. I'd like to say we table this thing again and come back and talk about this when we can make something happen instead of just push it out of this committee. So I make a motion that we table it till next session.
So that would have to be a substitute of the substitute motion. Okay, so Representative Dorji, as I understand it, since we're on a substitute motion, we're going to close that first, and then we'll come back if you like. Thank you. And any further discussion on the substitute amendment? Representative
Okay,
Humphries.
so, sorry, we're still on the substitute for now because we can't do the substitute for, okay. Just super quickly, I just want to say that every city, county, they get to do their own ordinance, whatever works for them. And just to draw your attention to section, it looks like C, but it's really D. The provision shall not be construed to prohibit a city or county from adopting an ordinance that encourages or offers provision of services. It's not keeping any city or county from offering services. And the writ of mandamus is only for a violation. You know, it's not like everyone can do it all the time. There's no arresting people. It's just, as far as a law enforcement officer, it's just saying you can't write something that keeps them from enforcing. It's just you're asking them to enforce the law, which is the same as B up above. And I also sometimes work with the hot team about different things, and I understand this is not overstepping them, and every city or county can do what they want to do as far as their ordinance. But it gives them guidelines that they must prohibit unauthorized public camping, sleeping, or obstruction of sidewalks. That's what this is about. And again, I feel like that's kind of the crux of our homeless issue. So I'd vote against it. Thank you.
If there's no further discussion, I'll just add a little bit. When we had our interim committee, we had a lot of requests from business owners that the city enforce their laws. And one of the complaints was there's not an equal application of the law. You know, certain people have to follow it, and then the city wouldn't enforce it on sometimes the homeless population. And that was a great frustration from the business owners. And when I look at this section that the substitute motion deletes, I think that section is very helpful to the cities and the business owners to ensure that there is an equal application. And that it gives the business owner a little bit more clarity, and it gives the city officials a little bit more clarity that, yes, they actually have to enforce the laws on the books equally. Any further discussion or questions on the substitute amendment? Seeing none, Representative Meyer, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great discussion. I appreciate all points made, even though I respectfully disagree with many. With this, I had a lot of, throughout the discussion, I had a lot of additional questions and additional concerns. You know, I understand that you mentioned that it doesn't require law enforcement to do certain things, but the problem is that it could include anything. It's open, it's wide open for interpretation. So this could directly criminalize individuals and for public camping, sleeping, or obstruction. Now, I don't think that anyone on any side of this issue wants people to be sleeping on the streets or encampments. That's not something I know I want as a social service provider. I know that many people with me aren't into that either. But the issue is how this truly does encourage the criminalization and does not leave this to local control. It requires that every part of the state adhere to any ordinance they come up with without parameters. And I think we heard from well over 100 people last year in session that was not something that was appropriate or that they wanted. And I have not had the opportunity to consult with other municipalities or counties across the state or the League of Municipalities or any chambers or anything about their thoughts and opinions on something of this nature outside of that. So that is why I offer this. I will close my motion. Thank you.
So committee, just to make sure everybody understands the motion, this is a substitute motion. And you have the underlying amendment from Representative Humphries, and then you have the substitute motion that we're on from Representative Meyer. And her substitute motion will delete section new section 3. So, is that correct? Yep. Yep. So all those in favor of the substitute motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
The noes appear to have it. Division's been called. All those in favor of the Meyer substitute motion, please raise your hand. One, two, three, four, five, six. 6. All those opposed to the motion? 7. Chair votes no. So the motion fails on a vote of 7 to 6. So we're back on the original motion by Representative Humphreys to amend. So committee, quick pause. Actually, we'll try to, is there any more discussion on the Humphreys amendment? Seeing none, Representative Humphreys, you may close.
Thank you. I close.
Committee, you've heard the motion and it's been seconded. So all those in favor of the Humphreys amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. The ayes appear to have it. Division's been called. All those in favor of the Humphreys amendment, please raise your hand. 2. Chair votes yes, so that's 7. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. With 7 voting in favor of the amendment and 6 opposed, the amendment goes on. So committee, we're back on the bill. It's a little bit late. I know some of us have 3:30 meetings. I guess. Yes, I'll just, Representative Droege.
I think that we can all see that this is a lengthy, difficult subject, and I think we should table this until next session instead of putting out something and just pushing it out of committee. Thank you.
So committee, that is a motion to table. It does need a second. So as I understand this, this is a non-debatable motion. The second by Representative Roth. So I would say we'll vote. All those in favor of the motion to table, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Bill's tabled. And that concludes the discussion of House Bill 2723. Representative Johnson.
The comment was made, table it till another session. My understanding is that the homeless committee that met in the interim still is operative and could be called by the chair to handle this bill. Or at least it is something we could take a research on. I'd just make that as a suggestion. Thank you.
So committee, we're just, there's a question about the motion to table to the next session. Ask the reviser to explain if that was a proper motion or if we need to change it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we are in the second year of the biennium, as it's, an even numbered year. So at sine die of this session, any bills that are still pending would be dead at that session. So it would be, so if the motion is to do it by the table, through the end of session, then the bill would effectively not go through. Yeah.
So from the reviser's perspective, was it a proper motion?
Yeah, a motion to table to date certain is in order. I want to clarify that.
So once again, was it a proper motion?
Yes, a motion to table is in order like that, yes.
So committee, so the bill's been tabled, and so I believe that, if I understand it correctly, it's a proper motion. And so that ends our discussion on House Bill 2723. Appreciate all the work of the committee members this year and the efforts. Thank you very much to staff, research, the revisers, especially Gary, all the work prepping the committee, our IT. Thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned.